And when did you start going to college?
Well, I went back to college when I was 46 and got my undergrad. Took me 9 years. And then the following year I went into Marquette for graduate work and earned my master's in theology.
And did you enjoy your college experience?
Oh, I loved it. I still go to classes. I've been going to classes every year since. Even though some are a repetition, others are new. I've studied the history of art and physics, metaphysics, all different types of things that interested me. And there's an advantage of going when you're older, because by then you know what you want and you can zero in on your own passion and not listen to what somebody else tells you you need. You can say, I'd like to study this. I really would like to know more about it. And so I really enjoyed college. I'm still going. I go all the time.
So you felt it was easier going
Going back later?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely easier. At first I was scared. I thought, I'm not going to be able to compete with these 18, 19-year-olds, but I only had to be in my first class. I still remember my first class in anthropology, and the young teacher was fresh out of college himself. And while he's up there talking, kids are sitting there. One girl was painting her fingernails, another was filing her fingernails, and they were passing notes, and they were gabbing to one another. And I'm sitting in the back row. I always sit in the back, because I don't feel I should be up in the front like this. So I sit in the back and kind of observe. I'm quite an observer of humanity, so I'm watching all this as it's going on, and he's just completely lost control of the class. And then when they all left, he came up to me and he says, what do you think I should do? And I said, well, you're the teacher. Take charge. You're letting them take charge. And just because they're almost the same age you are doesn't mean that they can take charge from you. So the next class that he had, he was a lot different. He started our class and he kind of called them together and laid down a few guide rules, and it was a lot different. But I thought it was pretty funny that he'd asked me when he was the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Of course I got an A.
So, when and how did you meet Dave Kennedy?
Oh, we went to high school together. We were in a play at school. He played his violin, and I was just playing a bit part, and I can't even remember the name of it. But first time I heard him play the violin, I was hooked. And he started walking me home, and then I walked him home, and then he walked me home, and then I walked him home. We'd do that 5 or 6 times a night. He lived with his father, and I lived with my mother. So it was quite an expedition, the way we walked back and forth. We just didn't want to say goodnight. And he'd sing to me on the way home.
And for you, what was the most memorable part of living in the decades, like in the 50s? What was your most
50s?
memorable part of the 50s?
Well, let's see. I didn't especially like the 40s because that's when my husband was gone. He was gone for 3.5 years. And I didn't start having children until 56 when my first daughter, Diane, was born. So it got better after that. Earlier 50s, I don't remember anything except, of course, my brother Toby dying of leukemia in 55. But then Diane was born, and 2 years later, Daryl. And then 5 years later, Doug. 2 years later, Dean. 2 years later, Dwayne. So pretty well spaced. Worked out well.
And did you have any specific guidelines or goals for teaching your kids, or did you try to use some of the techniques that maybe your parents had on?
No, I didn't agree with the way my mother and father took care of us. No, if anything, I rebelled against that. And I knew there was a better way for raising kids than slapping them every time you turn around or spanking them. Especially my father had a whip that hung on the wall. It was a broomstick handle about this big, and it had leather thongs hanging off the side, and he could wrap that around your leg. And it would leave welts on your leg for weeks. And I thought that was very brutal. And I always thought that there had to be a better way than that. So maybe I didn't punish my kids enough. So I don't know. But I guess they all turned out pretty good.
But you still tried to stay with teaching early and games and
Oh, we always,
family
that
time.
part, yes, the family togetherness, that was very good. But I thought the discipline was a little harsh. Yeah. Also, the working all the time, which I wasn't the only one. All kids had to go to work at that time. You just had to help support the bills and food that had to be purchased, but it was pretty hard to work for a whole week in that hot sun and then come home and give all your money to your parents. And they would give you a nickel for the week so they could go to go to the movies. It only cost a nickel, you know, to go to the movies. So I didn't think that was fair. I should have been able to keep some of it.
Yeah. And having your husband as a musician, he made pretty good living.
Yes, he made a very good living. We were very lucky. And with the kids growing up, I was also lucky enough to have a car of my own, which a lot of women didn't have at that time. So I could come and go. I was free to take the kids anywhere I wanted to, and I did. I took them to Old MacDonald's farm, took them to the museum, I took them on hay rides, I took them to the patch on Halloween time to pick out pumpkins. I took them to the different theaters, wherever they had special showings of things like Disney's Living Desert. I always looked for things like that that would really interest them, not just silly stuff. I never did go for that.
Were you pretty involved in his business?
In his business, yes, I was the bookkeeper. Yeah, I kept the books. And I very seldom went to the studio itself. I was at home most of the time with the children. But every once in a while I would go visit him, and I think I avoided visiting because whenever I did, he'd send me out for cigarettes or run and get him a sandwich. Or I was just a gopher. So I tended to stay home. I found that more fun.
He tried to get the kids involved.
Oh, definitely. They were all involved. Diane was secretary at one time, and all the boys had to help move instruments, and they went on jobs with him. And when he played Summerfest, which he did for 17 years, they all had to go, and we got to go to Summerfest free, which is a really big thing in Milwaukee.
I guess we'll wait for the jet. I should just stop it. Not the way it's named. I heard you tell some stories, for instance, about the first Color movie.
First
Is it
Killer movie?
Color movie. I
What
guess
do you
you
mean
saw
Color? You mean
Color.
Well, the first color film was Wizard of Oz. Yes, you could hear a collectible sigh from the audience when it went from black and white, and that first color came here. We went, oh! Today, kids don't even think about that anymore. That was a big step forward. Very exciting.
Yeah.
It's a good movie.